And back to Zoom. Yes, there we go. Let me start recording this. Okay, and I think we are live. So today I've got the absolute honor to introduce to you Jennifer Mathews. Jennifer is joining us for our very first Up Spiral Grief interview, and I'm really stoked to bring this not just into the group Loving Love After Loss, but we really want to, like, we are recording this interview, we really want to share this message with the world. Jennifer and I are quite aligned with the idea of bringing a bit more positivity into grief. We will be talking about that. And this interview will be shared on various other platforms. I just want everybody to know who's watching this in Loving Love After Loss, because usually everything that is shared within the group stays within the group, but these interviews will be recorded and shared on other platforms around the world as well. So welcome, Jennifer. Thank you so much for being my first guest on this Up Spiral Grief show. And I'd love for you to introduce yourself to the audience. Tell us a little bit about yourself, please.
Sure. Thank you so much, Marie. Let's see a little bit about myself. Well, I live in Mount Shasta, California. I'm from the East Coast of the US originally. And I've had kind of an eclectic experience of getting myself to work on these issues around death and dying and grief and joy over the years. But the thread has really been social transformation for me. So whether I was working on economic policy years ago, I taught laughter yoga for a number of years, and now the death and dying field, it seems very like they're very different kinds of things, but really there's this thread of how can we really look at what our culture expects of us and the messages that we get, and be able to own for ourselves our own experiences. So for me, coming to this particular topic really is from that place of wanting to make a difference by having conversations, by exploring our own experiences and ideas and messages. Would you like me to launch into how I came to this?
Before we do that, because I'd love for you to launch into this, but before we do that, I actually want to quickly share with our audience how I came across you and what sparked my interest to actually connect with you. And so I'm just going to launch straight into that story, and then I'll give it back to you. So basically, I only just started Loving Love After Loss less than a year ago, and people started sending me messages that they found that had anything to do with grief, in particular when it was positive, because they knew my approach to grief was very much around the whole sense of allowing joy and happiness back into your life and not getting stuck in the I have to grieve forever, or that's exactly what you just said before, these expectations that society put on us, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But one of my friends actually sent me the link to your TED talk, and she's like, you got to see this lady is just like you, and she's got all these ideas around joy, and you so need to watch this. So I clicked on it, and I have to admit, I was like, oh my God, that's an hour. I can't do this right now. And I came back to it later because I realized I really wanted to sit down and actually take in the message. So I came back to your TED talk, and I watched the whole thing, and I was absolutely taken into this whole story and this whole idea of bringing joy into grief. And I was straight away like, oh my God, I need to connect with this lady. And, just to share that with our audience, we've been literally messaging back and forth and been trying to arrange a time that would suit both of us, and both of us got really busy schedules, and then spontaneously one night, which is like now, I'm like, okay, perfect. And we just chatted for like, I don't know, I can't even remember, 45 minutes, an hour
at least.
And it was such a beautiful connection. So I'm really, really grateful for that. And out of our chat and out of, where I shared the idea with you, that I just brought this hashtag Up Spiral into my group. Every time when somebody posted something really positive, I put this hashtag on. So when somebody came into the group and had a really bad day, they just need to put, hashtag Up Spiral or the word Up Spiral in the search function. They find all this positivity that can help them. And out of that was born the idea to do a bi-weekly interview, Up Spiral Grief. And I thought it would be so humbling and honoring to bring you as my first guest into this. And that is my little prep story, how we met, how we connected, how this whole idea came about. So I've got you to thank for. And please launch into it. I'll hand it back to you, and you can take it from there.
Thank you. Well, I love that you're doing the up spiral because, and the idea that people can go to that hashtag to
Yeah,
find some kind of connection to joy, positivity,
yeah,
being supported from other people, that there can be that experience,
yeah.
within
So
loss.
needed.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. And that actually is a good starting off point in terms of how I came to be talking about these topics. My life partner, Kate, who I had been with for almost 8 years,
Mm.
love of my life, soulmate, she was diagnosed with cancer when, let's say I was 39
Mhm.
and she was 41, and she was diagnosed and then had died 12 weeks later. So it just kind of gives you the time span. So it wasn't a sudden death and it
Yeah,
wasn't a lengthy
yeah,
diagnosis to death experience.
yeah.
Um, because we had had certain spiritual experiences and a path together, and also the laughter yoga work, which I did with her for many years,
Mhm.
I felt like that really supported me in many ways, but I still didn't know what would happen after she died and what my experience would be if I would
Of
not be able to get
course.
out of bed for months.
Yeah,
Like I,
yeah.
I honestly had no idea.
Mhm.
And I was really open to that, to
Mhm.
experiencing whatever happened. So what happened for me, and there's many, many reasons for this, I believe, but I think a lot of them can be transferable to other people, is that after she had died, I was in a fairly elated state for a
Mhm.
while. And other people were saying things like, wow, this is the hardest thing you've ever been through. This is really difficult for you. This must be horrible, um, which wasn't true for me. And
Mm.
then also when I was experiencing joy, connection, gratitude, people would say, wow, you're doing freakishly well. And they would look
Mhm.
at me with
Yeah,
suspicion, honestly. And some friends would
yeah,
kind of lean in and say, how are you really doing?
yeah,
Because
yeah.
they imagined that I was putting on some kind of, oh, I need to be cheerful and positive
Mm.
about this. But my genuine experience was really a deep connection, which I'd love to talk more
Yeah.
specifically about as we have the
I'd love
conversation.
to, I'd love to actually, if you don't mind,
Sure,
ask you about that right now, because,
sure.
for a lot of people watching this right now, this might sound very, very unbelievable. And they're like, how on earth? So what do you put it down to? What was your very personal experience to how could you experience that joy? What do you bring that down to? Was it the laughter yoga? Was it the preparation? Because often people say to me, oh, you dealt with that so fast, and I can't believe how positive you were around that. And I said, well, for me, I put it down to having had like 8+ years of very, very intense coaching experience, personal development.
Mm,
Everything I did
yeah.
and taught was around mindset and positivity and personal growth. So that to me was like preparing the soil that was very fertile. And when you plant a seed in a fertile soil, it grows a lot faster than others.
Yes.
So what do you bring it down to? Why you were able to turn towards joy rather than sinking in that feeling of sadness, bitterness, anger, whatever other people often experience around death?
Mhm. As I mentioned, I feel like there are lots of different factors.
Mm,
So what happened for me is, even when people said, well, someday later in years in the future, then you'll actually feel it. Then you will
yeah,
spiral into grief,
you
that
get
kind
a
of
lot
thing.
of that. That's denial. And I'm like,
It's
yeah,
denial, it's
yeah,
repression. There's those
yeah,
ideas. And I honestly feel like it's important to say that for some people, that's really true, that it
yeah,
can be repressed or denial of the
yeah,
emotions or of the experience. And I
yeah,
invite people, everyone knows themselves best. So
yeah,
it's like, you know yourself best, you know what your experience is, and it comes down to that self-awareness is really
yeah.
key. And I love what you say about the self-development, because I really believe that years of spiritual connection, different different techniques, meditation, but
Hmm.
also at a really basic level, the concept of gratitude
Mm,
and being able to not not get stuck as best as I could. So I feel
yeah.
like that is one of the things that laughter and laughing for no reason and teaching
Hmm.
that, learning that really did, is there's a place where it allows us to just let go.
Mm,
So I tend to talk about willingness and choice, and
yeah.
laughter's really taught me that, because there's this place of, if I don't want to laugh, if I don't want to smile, it must mean I'm holding on to
Hmm.
something and I'm not willing to let it go even for a moment. But I found that if I can just let something go for 30 seconds, a minute, 5 minutes,
Yeah.
and say, I'll get back to that challenging emotion later, which,
Yeah.
you know, often then you don't do once you can
Yeah.
kind of move through it.
Once you
It
realize how
gives it some
beautiful the
kind of,
other emotion is.
right.
Yeah.
It gives people space and permission. And
Mm.
so for me, that's kind of the generality, but I think some of the unusual factors that people don't talk about, one would be the support that I had for Kate's soul experience, for lack of a better word. And I don't talk about this actually very often, but it feels really significant today. I really, when she was diagnosed, we both knew that she would die and it would not be a very long trajectory.
Yeah.
There was this level of, I don't even know if I'd call it acceptance or if it would be acknowledgement that, okay, this is actually happening and we need to face this head on. And in that, we had a similar worldview or belief system that this was her next step, and that her next step meant leaving her physical body. And I realized that, you know, many people who are listening to this, you may or may not have the same spiritual belief system. And I feel like that's okay. But for me, that was really significant. It was almost as if she was going to a foreign country and we didn't have the internet and we didn't have cell phones or any ways to communicate. Like she was going to go somewhere else to do her next step, that it was kind of an initiation or graduation for her. And it meant that I wouldn't be able to have physical contact with her anymore.
I think I really, sorry to interrupt very quickly. I think I just want to highlight this because I feel that is such a beautiful way of seeing that. And, you know, as you said, all of us have got different spiritual beliefs, and this comes with no judgment to whatever people believe, but I'm absolutely with you on this. And I find this is so beautiful, knowing that leaving the physical body is not the end. You know, this is my absolute belief too. And again, you know, whatever happens thereafter depends on everybody else's spiritual beliefs. But I love the comparison that you say, you know, it's like she's going to another country where there is no internet and where I can't have physical contact with her. And I want to ask you on that though, because for me, when I lost my dad, I was 20. So I didn't have that background in self-development back then. And I took it very, very differently. I took it really hard. And it took me a long time, a lot longer, to deal with my dad's death back then, because I didn't have that support. I didn't have the background, and I felt very unsupported through this whole process. And I felt it was unfair, and you know, I still needed him, and I went into all of that. And one of the reasons why I found it so hard to deal with was because of exactly what you just said, that he was physically not around anymore. And I loved hugging him, and I felt so safe when he hugged me, and I so needed and wanted that. And so I know, like, we are adults now, and it's very different how kids deal with that and how adults deal with that. I mean, I was 20, but I didn't really feel like an adult at 20, you know, like you're still in that in-between stage of like really growing up and having life experience. But now that we are talking from woman to woman who do have a lot of life experience, how did you cope with that fact? Again, everybody's different, everybody's got different needs. My love language is a quality time of physical touch. I need that hugging, I need that. So how did you deal with that, knowing that that was to come? Because yes, you do have the very strong spiritual connection, but there's also these physical needs where you know that you have to prepare yourself for that not to be there anymore. And preparing ourselves and then dealing with it can often be a very, very different understanding. So I'd like to get that back to you and tell us a bit about that.
And those are my same love languages, actually, the quality time and touch. So I understand what you're saying in terms of having that physicality around. I feel like it was a really deep level of trust, and there was such a deep love. And that doesn't mean that it couldn't go differently for someone else. So again, to people who are watching, I'm just speaking from my own experience, but that the depth of the love was so proud of her. And so proud of how she faced knowing that she was going to be transitioning, you know, to a different form and out of her body. And that it continues to, I mean, even now it's like, I can't help but smile talking about her. I
love
feel
when
like,
you call it a graduation. I'm like, that is so beautiful. Such a beautiful way of saying that, you know, and seeing
so
it.
Thank you. So really
Yeah.
it's I mean, one of the things I've come to cultivate for myself has been this idea of absence and presence. And I feel like that's what you're touching on.
Yeah.
Is when I really looked for 5, 6, 7 years, I studied, I read, I wrote, I reflected, I did workshops and retreats, and it really was exploring, why wasn't I devastated? Like what's almost like from a, what's wrong with me? Why am I not devastated? Am I missing something here? The connection has been this solid thread with Kate. And I truly believe that connection can be the antidote for loss, that if I'm in those moments of connection, even if they last seconds or minutes, I cannot experience loss and connection at the same time, because loss is that perception of separation.
Wow. I love that.
And,
I love
grief
that.
comes from the perception of the separation. So yes, I absolutely acknowledge that there's a physical loss. The person is physically not there. However, on the other level, I can find my way to connection. And it doesn't have to be spiritual. It can be memories. It can be an essence. It can be the qualities. It can be me feeling so much joy when I think about her. Now, what's slippery, I think, sometimes is when people say, well, I miss him, I miss her. And when I think about them, the presence, I think of their presence and then I get sad. It's really subtle, but it means that the focus is still on the absence of the physical. So if we can just ask ourselves, or I ask myself, where is my focus? Those moments of, okay, it's not here. I wish she was here to go to spend time at the ocean with me today. Whatever it is, it's like, if I focus on the absence and the fact that she's not there, I will go down a certain road of emotions, which is okay. But my preference is to find the connection. And that's been a really deep experience. And that's where, to me, that's where that place of love is. It comes forth and it fills me. And honestly, there's a place where I can't even explain it. And so sometimes having these conversations, I don't tend to go here typically, but it feels important to do that with you.
I love it. Thank you. I feel very honored that you share that with us.
There's so much to say on that. I feel like there's just many layers of what it looks like in my day-to-day life.
Can I ask you something else around that? Because I know we very, very briefly mentioned that in our quick pre-chat that we had when we were trying to sort out our technical stuff. And that was the question, how people equate love to grief, because I feel that fits very well in what you just said. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. And this is because grief is it's a very tender place, right? I mean, that's all of what we're doing, wanting to support people and wanting to support each other in this process. And for me, as you know, there are many, whether it's quotes or cards or things in books or lectures people offer. And very, very often, the majority of the time, I have found that people say, the more you love someone, the more you grieve. And they say that because they really want to comfort someone and say, hey, look, you're grieving because you love them so much. My experience is that love and grief are not a proportionate equation. It's not a ratio. The more you love someone, the more you grieve. It's just simply not true, because I can have this bursting amount of love and not experience sadness. And in fact, that amount of love for me has carried me through. Because of that.
I love that.
Because of that. So I find that what happens is that there's a societal expectation for us to grieve, which makes sense. It makes sense that we would go through a process of responding to death that often can be heartache and sadness. But along with that expectation is that if we stay in the sadness and stay in the grief, it continues to show our love and offer us connection. So there's an idea that the more we love, the more we grieve. It almost means, well, stay in the grief, stay there because it shows your love. It's an example and illustrates how deeply you cared for this person. But what it actually does is it actually creates disconnection in my experience. Because to connect with someone's essence, someone's spirit, however we look at that, no matter how we look at that, I do feel like we need to have some kind of anything that it takes to find peace, connection, essence, their presence in our lives. And that allows us to connect more easily, which allows us to experience less grief. So we get in this kind of box, this grief
I
box or
absolutely,
trap
I just love that so
when
much.
we
Can I
equate it.
just, on that
Please.
note, I really
Hmm.
want to highlight that before we go any further, because I feel that is such an important point. You know, a lot of people, when they stay in that grief, and I'm saying, I want to also clarify that I'm saying in the grief in a way that they stay stuck in the sadness and in the focus on the absence of that person. They feel like, or in their mind, they're telling themselves that that's how they are honoring that person, by staying there as long as possible. And you know, different cultures celebrate that differently, and celebrate is probably
Mhm.
quite a wrong word for that, or what's the better word for that? Live it differently, really, or express it differently. And there are
Mhm.
cultures where, you know, women have to wear black for a whole year, and the gentlemen used to have like a button to, you know, showcase the loss that they had experienced. And some of the women chose to wear black for the rest of their lives and never ever
Mhm.
look at somebody else again in their lives. And that was all in the name of honoring the person that they have lost. So for me, when we talk about how love equates to grief, I know that Rob and I had a few talks around, what if something was to happen to us? You know, how would you, how would I? And both of us said, I would want you to find love again. I would want you, and that's not even talking particular about a new partner, but that as well. But it was in particular about, I want you to go out and live life and find love
Yes.
and find joy and find happiness, and be that for the boys, because we've got two boys that we want them to have a happy life. And I felt like it would have almost been like a dishonoring, Rob, if I would have gone down, like, you know, down spiral and stay stuck in anger, bitterness, sadness, something like that. I have to say, I didn't even experience any sort of anger or any sort of um why. A lot of people said to me, you must constantly ask yourself the question why. And I always looked at them and said, no, I never did. And
Yeah.
they were like completely taken back by my complete honest, no, I never did. And they're like, how come? And I said, well, my belief is, and I know everybody's belief is different, but my belief is, a cut that deep, when somebody that you're so close to gets just taken out of your life, doesn't happen without a huge purpose behind it. And I believe
Yes.
I have found this huge purpose, and that of course helps as well. But I didn't have that from day dot. But I had this belief from day dot that it would happen for a good reason. And I'm not saying that in a light-hearted way. It's like, oh, everything happens for a reason.
Right.
Oh, you know, that gives me a bit of a shiver when people say that, because it kind of
Mhm.
feels wrong when people say that to you as an explanation. But when you experience it like that, and when you feel it like that, it really shifts something within you.
Yeah.
So
And
yeah,
that
I just,
honoring.
yeah, I just wanted to say it,
Mhm.
because you, like, you know,
Thank
when the
you.
focus stays on the absence, you really do create the disconnection. That's the complete opposite
Yes.
of what you think that you're doing. And I really wanted to highlight that and throw my experience in there, that I could not vouch for that more. You know, it's really, I'm so
Mm.
glad you're sharing this.
Thank you. And I mean, I love how you put that in terms of honoring someone
Yeah,
by bringing love and life and vitality
yeah,
and joy into your life. And that doesn't mean, I mean, you know, you and I know, it doesn't mean to push down other emotions. It means to
no,
keep feeling those feelings, but to
yeah,
remember that they're waves and that we don't need to follow the feelings of heartache and
yeah,
sadness as a way to honor. In
yeah.
fact, we need to do our best, I believe, to find a way back into life.
Hmm.
And for me, it wasn't even a back into, and it sounds like for you, maybe not so much either, because you were able to maintain that with your self-development
Hmm.
practices and
Yeah,
perspective on death, perspective on life.
yeah,
But I absolutely believe that loved ones who have died want us to have a zest for life
yes.
and want
I
us
absolutely believe that too. Yeah,
to
I
live
do.
fully. So,
Yeah,
so if we can shift that idea, or at least question it, at least have the conversation with one another and
yeah,
say, hey, can we consider how it's not dishonoring, it's actually honoring, and how we don't want to push
mm,
against ourselves or each other, but we
yeah,
do want to be able to step forward, to up spiral, right?
yeah.
We want to be able to up spiral as an
Yeah,
honoring of people who are no longer here in the physical.
yeah.
Yeah.
I absolutely love that idea, you know, of honoring the beautiful vision that we had, that if something was to happen, that we continue life with joy and with love, and happiness, and really have that, because that is what we always wanted for ourselves and the boys. And I really believe I'm living that, and also like receiving that feedback from my boys of how I dealt with it is just really beautiful, and is the proof that it obviously does work, and it's obviously what they need as well. And it is such a relief to allow yourself that as well. You know, it's a huge concept for me. That's the most profound concept in grief, to get to this space of allowing. And I understand that for some it might take years and decades, and for others that takes seconds. You know, everybody's got their own speed, and I believe that it must be okay to allow ourselves. And I did not always experience joy and happiness all the time. I had moments where I was sobbing, but it felt good, and it felt like a release. And then I went back to smiling and laughing, and that was okay too. I just want to encourage people to not live up to the expectations that society puts onto them, because they're all labels. You know, you need to do this or you should do that. It doesn't feel right. I want to encourage people to like really follow their heart, and when they feel like laughing, then laugh, and when you feel like crying, then do that too. For me, it's more the idea of not staying stuck in a heavy and negative emotion too long. But when they do come, allow them in, allow them to be lived and experienced, but then also to, you know, move on or move back to happiness. It's all part of life. So that whole balance that I feel needs to be a lot healthier.
And I do feel like what you describe as the sobbing, or it's a visceral movement of emotions. And there have been different studies done that look at how long emotions last in our bodies, the actual biochemical surge of emotions. And I do believe sometimes it comes out of nowhere, or maybe you see something and or think of something and it reminds you of the absence of someone, and it comes in. But that's still part of the adapting, and that doesn't have to last very long. I think it's really important to allow that somatic experience.
Exactly.
But then it's where do our thoughts go after? And I think our tendency is to start thinking about the absence of the person, like thinking about how they're not here. And we then build upon what really could just be a simple release. But we create more challenges and suffering for ourselves, I think, if we follow the thoughts. So whatever techniques, I mean, there's many different ways to do it, but that people can find to be more aware of their thoughts, and be more aware of what's underneath the surface of the subtleties of belief systems, and find connection. And, you know, whether that's being out in nature, whether that's playing music, doing yoga, I mean, whatever it takes to not be stuck, as you say, and to clear.
It's like the thoughts I really, it's one of the things that I constantly remind people of, and that I constantly use in my teachings as well, that our thoughts are so crazily powerful, you know, and they can absolutely destroy us or absolutely uplift us. You know, it depends on where we allow them to go. And I'm not saying you always have to think positive. You always have to. It's unrealistic. We will have thoughts that come up that are negative or that could bring in fears. Yet it is all about the way we respond to them, and we look at them, because they can, for me, the best way to deal with that is using them as teachers. So when a negative thought comes in, I don't try to push it down. I don't try to completely fall into it. Sometimes I do. I'm only human, you know, that happens. But for me, the healthiest approach would be to go like, okay, you're here. What are you trying to teach me? There's always a lesson in that. There's always a message when a negative thought comes up. That might be a warning. That might be even a reflection. We might feel a fear and then realize, oh, that was not even mine. That was a reflection that I took on board. So really being a bit more observant with the thoughts when they come in. And that's probably the best way to put it, because that's what we are taught in yoga, you know, like, or in meditation, I should say, not so much in, well, yoga maybe as well, but it's from the meditation. When a thought comes in, just observe it and let it go past. You don't have to hold on to it. You don't have to own it. You don't have to make it yours. But like just looking at what's your message for me, you know, and I believe that again is coming back to a space of allowing, just allow it to come in. Look at it, and not every guest that comes into your house is somebody that you want to move in, you know. It's like, just look at them, observe them, and be okay with letting them go if you don't want them to stay. So
Yeah, and I think the curiosity too, just having both curiosity for ourselves and what we're experiencing and approaching it like, this is interesting, or the thought
Yeah,
that goes by, and being curious and about other people too, because then it gives us that room, the permission for people to respond to death however they do respond to death. And that
yeah,
may or may not mean that they're experiencing grief and sadness. So it's that kind of room I'd like to see people
yeah,
create more in various ways.
yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I'd like to go back to your TED talk as well, because that really, really inspired me. And actually, by the way, if you don't mind, I would love for you to put a link of your TED talk into the comment section, because we're live
Oh, sure.
streaming that into the group at the
Mhm.
moment. So for people who haven't found it in the group, you can either go and put Jennifer Mathews in a search function, or just make it easier for them, we can put the link of your TED talk in the comment section after this interview, because
Okay,
I
great.
absolutely loved it. And I'd love to ask you, do you mind sharing what the reactions were from people? I guess there would have been
Mhm.
positive, negative reactions, all of the above. People might have been shocked. People might have been, oh, finally somebody's talking about it. What were you faced with when you went through this experience of doing the TED talk?
It was definitely somewhat of a mix. And just first, so that people know, the name of the TED Talk is Death is Inevitable, Grief is Not. So
Hmm.
just the title of that, the idea that death is inevitable, we know that grief is not.
Yeah,
Whoa, hold on
yeah,
a
yeah,
second.
yeah.
I mean, and I was really intentional about choosing that
I
so
love
that
the title.
people could be aware before watching that that was the perspective I was sharing.
Mm.
Um, the response at the actual live TED Talk was very positive. There were many people who came up afterwards and said, I felt when my mom died 20 years ago, I actually felt fine and was happy
Mm.
and felt connected to her. And
Mm.
I felt guilty for the past 2
Yeah.
decades.
Wow.
And I thought something was wrong with me, which is exactly what that was the reason. That was the reason why I wanted to get this message out there, because I
Mm.
know there are a lot of people, I imagine, at
Yeah.
least enough people,
Yeah.
who struggle with that, feeling guilty because they're not actually feeling sad, or that they're not
Yeah.
experiencing grief in the way that society would
Yeah.
expect them to. So, so through that process, even though there was that positive response, it took TED a bit of a time to upload the talk, and this was a
Mhm.
local TEDx Ashland talk in Oregon,
Mhm.
because it was under review.
Mhm.
And I don't actually know the details of that, except that they ended up actually putting what I would call a disclaimer on the talk, with a concern that my perspective may be, I can't think of the second word, but
Offensive.
distressing, or
Okay.
wasn't offensive, objectionable, or
Okay.
distressing.
Yeah.
Now, if people watch the talk, they'll find out that it is all about finding our way to joy, connection, and
Mm.
gratitude. And the main message is that there are many ways to respond to death, and grief
Yeah.
is only one of them.
Yeah.
So most people, I've had very positive feedback that most people feel relief.
Mm.
They tend to feel that this gives them the kind of space they
Mm.
need to be themselves and to
Yeah.
experience the whole range,
Mm.
instead of people feeling like, oh, this means that you don't want me to feel sadness and heartache.
Mm.
People have really understood that it means I want people to experience what they do and not feel like it's wrong to be
Mhm.
happy.
Yeah.
So, and then there has been some on the other end where people feel possibly invalidated,
Mm.
because as if I'm saying you don't experience grief, you shouldn't experience grief, and that's not what I'm saying. I mean, I
Yeah.
think that's a natural place, again, with this tenderness, because when
Mm.
people are in pain and struggling and suffering with the death of someone they love, and they don't see a way out, or they feel like, well, doesn't that invalidate my pain? And I'm here
Yeah.
to say, no, it doesn't invalidate your pain or your sadness.
Yeah.
But it is true that there are tools and there are perspectives and practices we can have that can make it easier for us. And I
Yeah.
really believe that. And
Yeah.
that is what the last part of my TED talk is about,
Yeah.
is that experience and the research that's out there that really shows, oh, okay, what I experienced isn't just solo and isolated. There are
Mm.
actually people out there who have
Yes.
navigated this in a
Yeah.
similar
That is
way,
so
like yourself.
beautiful. Yeah. what you've provided with this TED Talk is really beautiful, because again, it comes back to the space of allowing joy to happen as well as happiness, and all of the above. For me, I did quite a confronting comparison around that once, when I said, so imagine that you walk onto a field of wounded soldiers, they're lying everywhere, there's blood everywhere, they're in so much pain. And then somebody would walk through and say, oh, that's going to hurt forever. Oh, there's nothing you can do about that. That wound will stay open forever. That it's going to be bleeding forever, and it's going to last. And people would shake you and ask you whether you're out of your mind, because they're like, why don't you put some dressing on that? Why don't you rinse this wound? Why don't you, stitch up that gushing blood wound? I know it's very confronting and it's full on, but I needed to do this for people to understand what they are actually doing on a daily basis when it comes to grieving people. So somehow society decided that it's absolutely acceptable to do exactly that when you're grieving, and you walk around and say things like, oh, you'll always miss him, or that'll always hurt. You'll never get over that. There'll always be a hole in your heart. Comments like that are absolutely socially acceptable and are constantly spread around like confetti in various grief support groups. And I don't agree with that. I just can't understand how people can do that and everybody thinks that's okay. Because if that would happen with a physical wound, you'd get sued,
Right.
Like seriously.
Well, it's a disservice. I listened to when you did your video about that, about saying, just that it's one thing, when people say get over it, the other end of it is people saying you'll never get over it. And I was so really touched. Yes, really touched and excited that you brought that up, because it's another piece people aren't talking about. To say it's not true. You will never get over this. It's not true. And it's
almost like
that idea of
not
connection
allowing
again.
it. Yeah.
Well, I do feel like it's as we can learn to distinguish between the connection and the loss, or have that built, whatever it takes to find our way to connection. I do believe we'll see more and more that grief and love do not have to be married. Grief does not have to be the glue that connects you to the person you love. Joy can be the glue. Peace can be the glue. I mean, so many things can be what connect you. And I think that's what you're speaking to. I think there's that holding on that happens. And the only way to get at it, to me, is to speak out loud and bust these myths. Because if we don't actually speak it and say, hey, this is a message we've been given, let's examine it. Let's look at it. Is it true? Is it really true?
Yeah. Is it really true? Exactly.
Then we can't claim that power.
Yeah. I also, like on that note, would love to raise the topic of labeling a little bit, because that is something that happens a lot. That is, to me, is classified as labeling. When you say you'll never get over it, it's like putting an expectation on someone that almost validates what they might be fearing at that moment. How will I ever get past that? And then somebody rocks up and goes like, oh, you'll never get over it. I was like, oh yeah, okay, then it's normal what I feel. And they stay in that. And it's, I call it classified as labeling, when you tell someone it's never going to be like that, or it's always going to be like that. And then people stay in that because they get validated in their fear of, oh my God, what do I do with that? And I believe that we need to bring back the concept of choices. And in particular, when it comes to that, that grief, that tenderness that we experience, where we can feel so disempowered. For some, that it's like a huge process of feeling disempowered, feeling that there's nothing I can do. I've been completely robbed of my ability to choose anything, because obviously I did not choose for Rob to die. But I made a huge point about it, and I actually shared that at Rob's eulogy. There was like 500 plus people in the audience, and I shared a message about choices, and Rob was the one who taught me the concept of two choices, or, initially, even way before I started my coaching journey. And I felt it was the perfect moment to share it there and then, because people were in such space of tenderness and hurt and grief, that I said, we do have the choice how we respond to that. And I knew there and then, and I shared that in front of everyone, that my choice would be love over sadness and happiness over bitterness, that I needed to choose that quite deliberately for me and the boys to move forward and to honor him and to honor the life and the love that we had together, and keep that alive, keep that joy, keep that spirit in our hearts. And people were absolutely blown away by that message, because they did not expect to hear that at a eulogy. And I was standing there, and I could literally feel Rob standing behind me, and how proud he would be for me to share that message, because I felt everybody needed to hear that. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on labeling and choices around that, because it's two quite big topics when it comes to grief and how we deal with that.
I think, again, what you're talking about is being trusting of each other and not being suspicious. I think the labeling comes out of a kind of judgment of, well, you can't not feel that way, or you must be repressing your feelings and bypassing them. But how can we get to the honest, real, deep, raw conversations? And if your experience is that and is true, then we need to believe you. So, I mean, this is, in terms of labeling, I feel like one of the biggest labels is that death is a horrible and awful thing. That we as humans are labeling, instead of seeing death as neutral. It doesn't mean that the circumstances can't be tragic and really difficult and painful to move through. But death itself, every single one of us is going to die. And we know that. But then we label that death is bad. And to me, that's the ultimate label. If we can get through that part and say, wow, okay, death is a part of life. It's part of the life cycle. We usually don't have control over it on a physical level, like you had mentioned with your husband. However, there's another level where it's the years, and this is, I know this is treading on lightly here, but how many years we have. I know there's a place of when people die young, or when children die, it's extremely, can be very painful and difficult, because we want them in our lives. We want to experience them. We want that to carry forward, and we feel like we're missing out on something, and that they're missing out on something being in this earthly world. And at the same time, I do feel like there's that place of people die when they die. We can't explain it. It's a great mystery. We can all have different belief systems about it, but the truth is it happens and we can't change it. So when we label the response to that, when we say, okay, when someone dies, the only way you can deal with it is to be sad about it. That's the umbrella piece I feel like you're talking about, and every other label falls under it, which is why a lot of what I like to talk about is, can we shift the language of grief? Can we stop saying, how's your grieving, or someone's grieving, or we all grieve differently. I would say, no, we all respond to death differently. And grief itself is a label. So the more and more we can use language.
It's so true. Grief itself is a label.
Grief itself is a label. So can we get past
about it that way? Thank you.
And I do hope that people, language forms, and that's where I think you have a particular awareness of labels. Labels form our experience. So if you say to someone, you're never going to get over this, that label just will shape someone's experience or influence it or confuse them or whatever that does. Let's do our best to have awareness and make choices that support one another in the broadest possible way. As to be who we are, to experience what we experience, and to be happy. I mean, ultimately, people ask, well, what difference does it make to me what other people go through? Well, I want people to suffer less. I want to bring light and joy into the world. It's really simple. And that doesn't mean I have a judgment about their challenges or about someone suffering, but I know how it can be. And I want people to be able to experience that joy and connection. Because honestly, it's my preference. I prefer to feel that lightness and gratitude over feeling heartache and sadness. It's
I think everybody does. It's just a matter of
so.
how they get to that, because the natural state is people do prefer to be happy than, and again, I think we need to get this out of our minds, that it is such a false belief set that when we grieve and when we stay in the suffering, that we therefore honor our loved ones that have passed, or therefore keep the connection to our loved ones. And I've heard that over and over again, and with a lot of respect to the people that are in my group, that they actually mention exactly that. I feel like when I let go of that, then I let go of the last piece that I have of my husband or my child or whoever the loved one is that has passed. And it's actually couldn't be further from the truth. So I really want to highlight what you said earlier on, this whole, when we focus on the connection rather than on the absence, this is when we actually honor them. This is when we actually feel and stay connected to the loved one longer, when we talk about the beautiful memories, when we talk about the quirky things they said or did, you know, that really keeps them alive in our memories and keeps that connection, that feeling of connection going. And also, you know, I know I had a really, really beautiful talk to one of the people in this group here who has lost a husband and then remarried and unfortunately lost her second husband too. So it was really quite an intense experience for her. And obviously it brought up a lot more. But also allowing that when there is a next chapter, that it is not taken as dishonoring the previous chapter, or it's not taken as, oh, you've moved on too quickly, or, you know, this is not right. I believe we know when it's right, when there's a new person coming into our life, and that it's okay to still have love for this person and still have the memories and the connection, but also being okay with there is a new chapter. It doesn't disqualify or devalue, sorry, that's the word, the previous chapter in my life. And I just felt like that was a really important one to say as well, because there's a lot of judgment around that too, and it doesn't belong.
And again, I think it comes back to knowing ourselves, because one person may go right into another relationship because they truly are very spacious and they have a lot of love for the partner who had died, but they go into something else because their heart is that open and they actually are ready. Another person may go into something because their need of companionship or security or whatever that unfulfilled need is in them is really great. And so they do go in possibly for a reason that is to create some kind of healing, or they're maybe not as ready in that way. So it comes back to knowing ourselves and being really aware of what are my intentions? Am I really aligned in my choices in my life? And that can be about being with another partner, or that could be about someone who stopped playing music because they felt really sad and they're playing music again. It's like, what's aligned inside of us? And meanwhile, while connecting, or what I like to call it, that which never dies. Like, what is that which never dies about the person that we loved who is no longer physically with us? And that doesn't have to be a spiritual connotation. It can be, but there's so much that never dies, right? That you're speaking of, the memories, the qualities, the characteristics, the way people impact our lives. I mean, there's no way. Kate will always be a part of my life 100%, because I am who I am today because of her. Just like I am who I am because of many interactions I've had, but she played a particularly significant role. So how do I remember that which never dies? And meanwhile, continue to live my life as fully and authentically as possible.
That is really beautiful. I remember, you know, when you said start playing music again, that is one part that I've actually shared in my book. It was a moment where I was standing in a kitchen, and I used to sing a lot. I used to sing all the time. For me, singing was a sign of being happy. And the boys commented a lot on that. It's like, Mom, do you have to sing everything? I'm like, yeah, I do. And it's just, you know, I would hear a sentence that reminds me of a song, and I would just sing it, or I would make a sentence into a song. And I remember that very first moment after Rob died, where I was standing in a kitchen, and all of a sudden I had this song, Love is in the Air, in my head that I used to sing a lot. And I started singing it, and my voice was so weak, and I was just so, I felt so deflated when I sang it. And then I realized what was going on. And I was like, I really literally put myself together and I sang it. And I was like, I know it wasn't like the usual joy and spark that came through, but it was like something got ignited there again that wasn't there before. And that was completely, I thought that flame had gone, but it got reignited, and it felt really good. And slowly but surely that all came back into my life, and I'm singing again, and it's just really beautiful to actually consciously feel that, and going through this process of, oh, what was happening there? Oh my God, yeah, that had disappeared out of my life, and I actually really like that part in my life, and I can bring that back. And it's not like a flick the switch thing, you know, it doesn't happen overnight. It's not like Rob died and I flick the switch, I'm like, okay, bring happiness back into my life. It's not like that. But it's like all those tiny little choices that I want people to realize that we actually do have, how we respond to it, because there is such my puppy's trying to catch a fly behind me. There's such a feeling of disempowerment that can happen when we lose someone, where we feel we've got no say in this, no power. But then going back to realizing all the little choices and all the little empowering moments that we do have, where we do have a choice, how we respond to it, what we do, how we move through this. I think that's exactly it. Once we start asking ourselves how rather than if, then we'll come back into solution mode and really find those answers if we open up to that.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And it will be different for everyone. I mean, I
Yes.
really do believe that, and that it's a responsible thing to say, okay, well, we're all going to deal with this differently. And people who have certain personalities or temperaments or backgrounds may find it more easeful or more difficult to work through because of many, not, you know, these external factors in our lives, but also all the internal factors too. And that's true and that's real, but it's the how, like you just said, it's the how, not if. And what choices that we can make and how we support each other in doing that.
I also love this. I got so many beautiful little golden nuggets from you today, and I can't believe we've actually gone through a whole hour already. What I would like to suggest, Jennifer, is like when we finish this interview, I'd really love for both of us to go through the comments, because while I'm here on Zoom with you and we're live streaming, I can't actually read the comments. So once we finish this interview, I promise we'll both go back. We'll see whether there were any questions or comments from you. I'll also ask Jennifer to share her TED Talk. For those of you who have missed that part, Jennifer did a really, really beautiful TED Talk with the title, Death is Inevitable, Grief is Optional. Is that right? Or Grief is Not?
Death is inevitable, grief is not. Yes.
And I really, really loved the TED Talk. That actually was the whole beginning of how I needed to connect with Jennifer. I saw her TED Talk and I thought, I really want to talk to this woman, and I'm so stoked that I brought you to our group today and that we recorded this interview and we can share it with the world, because I truly believe that the world needs to hear this message about the positivity and the really beautiful options that we do have, how we respond to grief, and that we don't need to bend down under all these labels and expectations of society. I'll bring it back to you, Jennifer. Thank you so much for your time, for your wisdom, for your beautiful words and joy that you shared with us. Are there any final words that you would like to share before we conclude this interview?
Well, I love what you're doing, so thank you for that and your work in the world. And I really do encourage you and others to use that language of how we respond to death, rather than say how we grieve and that we grieve differently, but to say that we respond to death differently. I truly believe the ripple effect of using that in to me, it's a more accurate way that gives all of us the room that we need to have our experience, that it will make a really significant difference. So that's, I think my final words are to encourage folks to use the language of responding to death.
Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate that. And sending a whole lot of love your way. And thank you everyone for joining us. And we'll get back to your comments and questions in a little while. Have a beautiful
please
day.
make comments and questions. I'm very happy to respond as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Have a beautiful day. Have a good night wherever you are in this world. This is Jennifer Mathews and Marie Alessi signing off. Bye for now. Bye.